Welcome and welcome back to In a Prosecco and the Epic Antarctica series. Cheers. I'm with my son Nick Slowy. Cling in our Prosecco. All right, so in this episode, Nick and I wanted to share our first 10 days out of this 31 night adventure. And in our previous episodes, we'd shared about how Nick actually got started in this world of cruising as a deckhand with Lindblad Expeditions. And then we also talked about even almost missing the trip altogether because of the missed flight and the chaos and making sure we were rebooked for a flight out, and just our initial experience and meeting people. And so we thought that it'd be helpful to give you some insight on our initial adventure and the things that we have done. So what happens when you go on a cruise into Antarctica? So when we left Buenos Aires, a little recap here, we left Buenos Aires and flew out to Ushuaia. It was a 3-hour flight. Then we spent most of the morning into the afternoon having a tour of Ushuaia, but really mainly going to the national park where we went to the most southern place, which is called
El Fin de Mundo.
Meaning
the world.
The end of the world. And then we went on a lunch catamaran that Lindblad owns. And then when we approached the endurance vessel and all of the excitement for embarking on this beautiful, beautiful vessel, in our last episode, we kind of talked a little bit about what it looked like. We want to be able to present at some point a video of our stateroom and some of the beautiful ship offerings and locations. But in this episode, we're going to share about how our first 10 days have gone. So what happens on an expedition cruise versus a traveling cruise that offers entertainment, nightly entertainment, casinos, grand size pools. We do have 2 hot tubs and sauna facilities, as well as a yoga studio. But I wanted to also bring more of awareness to what you can expect on an expedition cruise because of the more of the educational focus that these voyages offer. And I didn't realize how much I would enjoy learning through the actual lectures. So the first day that we embarked, it was really just getting to know people and visiting the ship, right?
If you've been on a boat before, you know that the very first thing that you have to do when you get on board is do a muster meeting to learn the safety procedures of the boat you're on, because every boat has different procedures. So the very first thing you do is learn what your boat's is and how to stay safe inside of it.
The difference that I found is that when we went on a celebrity cruise, when your dad and I did a 25th anniversary cruise earlier this year, all we had to do for the muster is just go in and report, and to know that we had our life jackets. And here on the vessel, though, we went through much more of a process to be educated. Can you share more about that?
Yes, this boat is all about, or Lindblad, I should say, is all about education in every regard. That's why
safety.
And safety. And that's why we have an open bridge policy. So when we meet, we have our captain and the head safety officer come down, and they will talk to us about what their thoughts about the procedures are. So the captain will give his briefing of the ship and what he believes the ship is capable of, and what a little inside view of what we'll be doing with the X-bow and the potential dangers that we could come across. And the safety officer started talking to us about the procedures in case something like that were to happen. So they played us a video that included the sound system, such as 7 short blasts followed by a long one. It means go to your muster station, and little bits of information such as how to properly follow your people in an emergency, such as there's lights on the floor if there's a blackout or smoke. Listen to the people that are guiding you and directing you. and then
Based on where your cabin
Yeah.
location is.
So on this specific boat, we have 2 different muster stations. So they talk to us about, depending on where you are in the boat, where you will go to muster. For this instance, we all mustered at the same spot, so we could all kind of talk together. That ended up not being our muster station. Our muster station was not used that day, and hopefully, knock on wood, it will never be used. But after they told us about the kind of safety aspect of everything, they took us out and showed us the lifeboats that would be dropped in case of an emergency. Because of the Titanic, actually, there's always lifeboats on both sides, enough for 2 times as many passengers and crew, like everybody on the boat total. So in case one of or half of the lifeboats are already sinking on the other side, the boat goes down on one side and all of those lifeboats are gone, you still have more than enough life rafts on one side to get everybody off the ship.
And a note to that, which was a great lesson. The Titanic, unfortunately, brought us a lot of lessons to have more than enough room, and in the event of half of them already unavailable. But what I found this is also really great about Lindblad is that the life rafts actually are covered. They're contained. So because of the cold conditions that we're in, that we're not going to freeze. And there's also plenty of supplies for us. What was the amount of time that we were able to have the supplies before being saved?
I believe it was a month to 2 months.
So pretty incredible thought that goes into really ensuring the safety of passengers and crew. And so, but what was really great is that it was just more it didn't take a lot of time, but it was really important for us to learn. I actually really appreciated understanding the safety measures that Lindblad goes to. Again, we're going to be on this vessel for 31 nights, and so and through very cold temperatures to be prepared. So after the muster procedure, we were able to actually enjoy ourselves from there, right? So you get that out of the way. The Drake Passage, let's talk about the Drake Passage. So everybody has heard about this Drake's Passage. It can either be the seasickness. If you have seasickness, Nick, you have incredible sea legs, nothing phases you. I only learned that I have seasickness on certain conditions, and it's when the ship is actually, we're dealing with swells of up to 30 feet when we go through Drake's Passage.
No, we did not go through 30 feet. Ours was very, very easy. We maybe went through 10 to 15 feet.
Well, the joke is that, when Drake's Passage is infamous for these high swells, and we were going through this voyage, and they call it the Drake Lake because it was actually very mellow. And the reason for the swells are because of the temperatures of the water that it changes.
Well, there's a whole bunch of reasoning behind it. Wind plays a factor. Wind always plays a factor in wave size. The moon plays a factor in wave size, how close the moon is to us, and where it is in orbit. There's quite a bit that goes into wave size and
the heat of the water, right? The heat of the South American, coming off of Argentina, it's summer. And then you've got the cold waters of the Antarctic continent.
And anytime you're going around a horn or something, the Horn of Cape Horn, or it's not a horn necessarily, but the New Zealand coast, anytime you're going past something like that down between 300 and 600, 30 degrees south and 60 degrees south, the winds automatically pick up around those pieces of land, so the waves will automatically start to churn faster and become bigger, with that wind being whipped around the land base that we are now going around.
I know. I'm so happy that you know this because I don't know that much of it. All I knew is that I needed to prepare with patches, and so these are patches. The example I will show you is that they're motion sickness patches. This particular brand I got on Amazon, and all I did is I stuck both of them on because I didn't know what to expect. again, just from the one experience, I normally have never had seasickness until early this year when we went through a rough patch, and I realized that even though I don't throw up, I still have enough of the feeling of the a little bit of nausea or just imbalanced. And I think it was actually after probably hormones changed, having two babies, maybe. But the thing that you brought me, Nick, I so appreciate that when we were going through Drake's Passage and it felt better to be horizontal than standing, you brought me meclizine. And that is the medicine of choice.
That's the medicine of choice on board Lindblad, at least. Meclizine is our seasickness choice because it is a non-drowsy motion sickness medication, and it allows you to take it while you're actually feeling bad, and it will still help versus a lot of seasickness stuff. If you take it and you're already feeling seasick, nothing will work.
So the key, if you have seasickness, or if you suspect that you might have seasickness, is to do the preemptive strike. So use the patch, take whatever. There's Dramamine, the meclizine, which is I ended up taking, but Nick, you helped me with that. But before we even went through the Drake's Passage, it was preparing for it. So we actually had an opportunity to celebrate the new year. We celebrated the incoming new year of 2024. And we don't have nightly entertainment per se, but the crew has a band made of the stew team, made of the wait staff, and even the stew members who clean our room, but also some talent that presented themselves. They sang. They played wonderful music for us, naturalists that even got up to sing with incredible voices. It's like the crew members are multi-talented. It's not like they just have one talent. We have one of the wait staff members, who is an accomplished pianist. And so that's part of the entertainment value, is that they are not only providing wonderful service to us, but they also have these hidden talents that we wouldn't normally see. So it's really fun to actually get to know the crew members as we're, just starting off in our first third of the cruise. So after getting through Drake's Passage, and I survived it, and we were finally into calm waters. Our first outing was not a landing, but it was actually a day on the kayak. So we kayaked together, and it was in Edmondson Sea area.
Edmondson Sound.
Thank you. Because of the excitement of being able to go out for the first time. Here's what I'll tell you. As things got noticeably had changed with the weather and the temperatures, but I'm starting to see ice accumulate as we're passing by, and I am excited. You can see the image behind us. That's not what we were seeing yet, but we were just seeing hints of tiny icebergs coming. And so when we arrived into Edmondson Sound, there were much bigger icebergs, and we were allowed to go out in kayaks. And so, Nick, you took the rear to be the strong man, and I was in the front, and all I wanted to do was capture every moment. So I had my iPhone, and I was taking pictures of the icebergs. And what happened?
What happened was, so just for some background, glaciers are not safe, or not glaciers, icebergs. We weren't near glaciers, we were near icebergs. Icebergs are not safe to be around. So they gave us, before we got in our kayaks, they told us stay the length of the iceberg out of the water plus half of it away from that iceberg. And the reasoning for that is because icebergs are very unstable things. So I knew this, but I had not explained this to my mother yet. And as we are going around looking at each piece of ice, my mom spotted a piece of ice that had these cool circular designs in it, and she wanted to get really close to it to take a picture. So I started kayaking over there, told her we're going to stop here, and she asked me to go a little bit closer because there was another kayak group that was almost directly next to it. And I looked at them, and I told my mom, we are not going anywhere near that thing. Those people are crazy, because if that thing starts to turn, they probably won't be able to get out of there in time.
They'll get sucked in.
Because the reason icebergs are so dangerous is because as parts of it are exposed to the air, it just naturally, and to the sun, it naturally starts to deteriorate, and there's the rest of that iceberg underneath the water that is not deteriorating. So it will need to rebalance itself. And as it rebalances itself, it will shift in the water. And as some people may know, icebergs are 90% under the water. So as big as they are outside of the water, they're much bigger below. And as that thing starts to turn, you don't know which way it's going to turn. You don't know what's going to happen with it. So thankfully, the kayakers that were very close to the glacier ended up kayaking away, and as I was explaining to my mother how dangerous it is to be that close to kayaks because they could start to turn, it started to turn just as it heard me explaining what turning is. So we got a very great video, as close as you could be to that iceberg, of the iceberg actually turning in the water and shifting and finding its balance again.
You're so right, because there was a couple who were kayaking in front of it, and you're like, they're way too close. And as soon as it started to turn, they were anxiously trying to get away from it. And what I thought was funny was not funny, but it was interesting, your perspective, because you just came from Alaska, and so you have a lot of knowledge about what these icebergs are capable of, and even with the turning and being aware of it. So the turning, you start to hear this gurgling noise, and then you start to see that it's bubbling, and that's when it's starting to turn over. And I'm trying to get my iPhone out to capture it, and I'm like, Nick, I really want to get this. And he's like, well, I'm just making sure that we're getting out alive. Which I appreciate. That was the teamwork in our kayak, is that Nick being the muscle and the brains in that moment, where I'm just fascinated by what's happening. And I did catch most of the turning, and I'll share that, which isn't caught very often because it's not something that you can predict. And that's the danger in it, is that it's unpredictable ice. It is beautiful to look at, but just be aware that if you're going to get close to icebergs, that if you ever have that opportunity, which, is just glorious, the water is so clear. And one thing that we should share is that because of the fact that it is colder, we go through a procedure where we're bundling up for the cold. So even before we're going out on any landing, any kind of Zodiac tour for the Kodiak or for the kayak, we are wearing several layers. We have put on a base thermal layer. There's another thermal layer, and then even wet pants that we put on. We have our parka that also has a puffer jacket underneath. We're also wearing a gaiter and gloves and even liners, just to make sure that if our gloves get wet, that our fingers don't get wet. And certainly if you want to get pictures and video like I do, to be able to take the outer layer of the glove off so that you have something that is going to keep your fingers warm, but also so to be able to have the flexibility to take your shot. And you're wearing headgear of some sort, so a beanie. You have this really cool hat that you wear.
That I got from Alaska. It's an Alaskan earmuff hat with a little flap in front of your forehead.
We'll have to show a picture of it. Believe me, it is better to be prepared, because there is no such thing as bad weather. It's just bad preparation. So the better off is to over layer if you need to, because then you can take the layers off if needed. So we're in the kayak, we've got our wet pants, and also boots. These boots that you have for work, I rented mine so that I didn't have to pack it, because I was really limited on just packing for over 35 days in one. I can't believe I just did it in one bag. But you have your boots that you actually just wear as you travel on the plane and things like that. I rented these boots. They're to keep you warm, because Lindblad offered a list of recommended items to pack. And so wool socks, the thermals and things like that. So as we're out for any landing, but we're kayaking, it was a glorious day. The sun was shining, blue skies. we got to see the iceberg turn. It was very cool. So that was the first day, and I thought, Nick, this trip is going to go fantastic.
Yeah.
So had the New Year's party, went kayaking on our first day out, being able to go out, and then we get to Peter the First Island. That was such a cool landing. That was our first landing day.
That's when we touched the continent of Antarctica.
Yes. And we came upon a small colony of Adelie penguins. And the Adelie penguins are smaller. Everybody knows about the emperor penguins, and that was what I was excited for. But we also saw a chinstrap penguin. But what was really cool about this landing is that it was a very small corridor, so we have to go by Zodiac. And the cool thing about the Zodiac here on the Lindblad Endurance, and you can talk more about this, Nick, is that there's actually a garage that contains the kayaks and the Zodiacs, and it's electronic based, so it makes it very easy. It's high tech based on what you do. It's safer.
Much safer.
But so to explain a little bit about this new technology of getting the Zodiacs out, because what you said is, I'm not going to miss any of these excursions because as a deckhand, I'm preparing it for passengers, and I know the work that goes into it behind the scenes so that it's seamless for us passengers, but as a deckhand, you know that it's hours of preparation.
Yeah, a deckhand's day for operations is a busy one because we're starting prepping 2 to 3 hours before, depending on what activity we have to do for that day. But that's because all of our stuff that we have on our boats is on the very top of the boat, which we call the Lido deck. And that's why it's so nice to have this garage here, because the garage is right on the water line. So the main difference is time, because it takes much less time to get a Zodiac out of that garage at water level and just drop it down, instead of having to take that Zodiac from the top deck and then lower it down your entire side of the ship, bring that hook back up and bring it back over and do the same thing. So that in itself is automatically much smoother, but we also have to prep the Zodiacs every morning that we use them. We have to put new air, not necessarily new air into it. We have to check the air compression, and if it needs a higher amount of air, then we'll put more in. If it's too inflated, we'll take it out. Down here, I don't know exactly what they're filling it up to. I would assume it's an industry standard of 3.2 psi, as that is what is recommended on each Zodiac. So that's my assumption. I don't know for sure though.
And these Zodiacs are high tech, but also they're sturdy and they're very thick, so that they're meant to go through. They're handmade, number one.
They're military grade. This is what the military uses. So when you see those Navy SEALs jumping out of planes with the giant box, and it opens and deploys and makes its own inflatable boat with an engine, that's what we're using as well. We just don't have the capability to have it drop out of an airplane like that. We have it on our boat ready to go at all times.
What's also cool about the whole excursion is that the expedition leader, Russ, and you've got the expedition leader assistant who's coordinating with the passengers, because the expedition leader is communicating constantly with the captain. So as the captain is focused on what is the safest passageway, the expedition leader is saying, okay, based on the weather and where we are going in the itinerary, they work together collaborating on where is the best landing. And so that's part of like the cool thing is that we're learning every night in our recap is here's what we did for the day and here's a glimpse of for what's happening for tomorrow. So when we know that there is a morning activity and an afternoon activity, the morning activity, if it's not safe to do a landing, we'll just do a Zodiac tour. But we also love to do the landings because that's where we get to actually see up close the seals and the penguins. And that day that we went to Peter the First, Nick, you were mimicking the flapping of the wings of the penguin, the Adelie penguin, and it started following you.
I don't know exactly why it started to follow me. I gave it its 5 meters. We have regulations down here in Antarctica from IATO, IAATO. That's the International Antarctic Association. Don't remember exactly what it is, but it's a treaty organization that allows or that comes up with all of the protocols and safety for Antarctica.
And to preserve to respect the wildlife and preserve their natural habitat as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. So one of those rules is to give penguins 15 feet or 5 meters. And I was doing so. I was just kind of getting in its eyesight so that it could see me, and I was mimicking it, flapping my arms as it flaps its arms behind itself. It seemed like it was a form of communication because penguins use sound. They are vocal animals as well, or birds, I should say. They're vocal birds, but none of them were really talking. So I figured that was the next form of communication. Tried to just have him see me do it as much as possible. And by the time we left, he had followed me back to the Zodiac, and as we all kind of left the island in the Zodiac, he was chasing after the Zodiac after me, and I made myself a little friend who I named Squishy.
So cute. And what was cool about that is that we also, on Peter the First Island, it was our first approach, right? We started seeing icebergs, but then to be able to really see the approach of Antarctica, the first island that is actually claimed by Norway. And so what's interesting is that we get lessons on, like, why are certain areas, based on explorations, why is this one area claimed by a country versus another area? And so really being able to be aware that Antarctica does have, it's not just a continent and it doesn't have countries, but it does have claim from countries based on explorers that had found it first. And so even though this was a small area, but then the following day after we did our landing to see and witness the penguins up close, and by the way, we have a scientist on board that is studying DNA of penguins and seals based on their poop, whatever deposits they're leaving or the residue. So Jane is the scientist that is joining us on here, and what is great is that as a scientist, she's actually able to collaborate with National Geographic. That gives her the opportunity and access to the exact places that we're going as tourists, as passengers, and she then is using that opportunity to be able to collect samples and see what is the health, because right now the biggest concern is the
avian flu.
The avian flu, the bird flu, and to understand what's the migration and whether or not colonies are impacted. So that is another reason for the 5 meters, is that not just only are we really being cognizant of the wildlife and keeping that in its integrity, but also so that we're not bringing anything back onto the ship. So we have protocol that we have to follow to leave the ship, whether it's a Zodiac tour or a landing, and we also have protocol when we return. When we leave, once we've gotten all of our clothes and our thermal underwear on, we're also bringing our badges from the ship, and in addition, we're bringing our our life vests that we always bring back to the stateroom. And the Endurance has a beautiful base camp that actually offers lockers for us to keep our boots and any of our outer gear that we want. And so what is the protocol that we end up following?
Well, before we follow any protocol, the staff members are sent to shore and they look for any signs of bird flu or avian flu. So if any avian flu is actively spotted in the location that we're at, we will not go as passengers over there. So after the crew staff have gone over and made sure that the area does not have signs of avian flu, that doesn't mean avian flu is not there, there's just no signs of it, that's when we'll get prepped and make sure that we go through our biosecurity steps, which would be as soon as we're dressed and ready to go, we step into a bucket. Actually, we had to step into a bucket first before we left the ship just to get our stuff ready to leave. We had to go step into a bucket of pink substance, which would kill off any avian flu, bacteria. We had to go through a fine search of all of our clothing, Velcro, pockets, stuff like that, to make sure that we're not bringing anything else from other places onto the island. So everything that wasn't brand new, our parkas were brand new, so they didn't have to be checked.
But even the stuff that I rented didn't have to be checked. Anything that we had packed from home, so that if you were wearing your own boots, you had to check it. Our backpacks that have, when we're holding camera equipment and things like that, that had to be vacuumed out.
We had to go through a very thorough process of making sure everything was not wiped down, but vacuumed out, and there was nothing that could be brought from anywhere we've been previously to the landing sites that we've gone. And then after that, after we're dressed and ready to go, we will step into the pink solution again, slosh our boots around in it, so the boots and the pant legs that are down near the ground get completely covered. Then once that's all covered, we're ready to go. The chances of the avian flu getting onto us and surviving is very low. But then when we come back, we do the same thing where we go through the biosecurity of washing everything off of our boots and pant legs or anything that touched the ground, which as of now is only our boots and pant legs. We are not allowed to crouch. We're not allowed to put things on the ground.
No kneeling.
Mm-mm.
And even with the tripods, the super photographers that are serious about capturing, anytime that we do a landing, they also have to clean off their equipment that has touched any land. But even with the Zodiac crews, we're wearing our boots and our wet pants, and we don't have to necessarily go through the same protocol because we never touch land. But what I appreciated about it is that understanding that we're not wanting to transfer anything from nature either way. So it's very respectful. It's a great safety protocol, have a huge amount of respect for it. And so that it's really an awareness of how these steps that are taken are really thought through, so that we can experience, that people who are wanting to experience this in the future have an opportunity to do so. And so we follow it gladly. But yeah, we're every time we leave the stateroom, we have to remember, did we bring our passage, because our passenger badges, so that anytime that we're leaving the ship, no matter what, if we're just doing a landing or a Zodiac, we always show that we have left. And then we also have to report back in by doing another swipe that we've returned to the vessel. So from there, what we did is the Bellingshausen Sea. So there are all these explorers that have come back in the 1890s and 1900s. So if you can imagine, like, we're traveling in luxury, but these first explorers who came built huts. And so we got to be able to go inside and actually see what they were building back in the early 1900s and what they were surviving on. So much less of the technology that we have today. And so there are agencies and organizations have really tried to maintain the integrity and the historical factor of restoration for these huts, to be able to really appreciate for us that are exploring today, to see what life looked like back when. And so to be able to go on some of these landings and view the huts is really extraordinary, because you really get a view on the very basic living conditions and in extreme weather conditions and how they were able to survive, which is fascinating. So the landings have been wonderful so far. The kayaking and any of the Zodiac tours that we've been on, and really this appreciation of ice. I've gotten some pictures that to really see the reflection is just as beautiful. And then because the blue ice that we see is based off of ice that just in water that doesn't have any access to oxygen.
Well, that's Ice that is any other shade other than that dark blue will have been exposed to oxygen, and then that dark blue will be the glacial ice that has been underwater or been deep inside of a glacier that has just recently popped out, and it's so blue because the cracks have not formed in that yet to allow oxygen to reach the inside.
It just makes this beautiful color that contrasts with the white ice, and then to see it floating in the water. So this appreciation, as they say, about like, oh, coming and seeing and being able to see the whales. We saw our first blue whale. Hopefully we'll see another one, but to see a blue whale on any of these excursions is very rare. And then to also see killer whales. It's like every day that we have an excursion, I think, man, this was the best day ever. And then we have another day and it was better than the last. That is the kind of planning that these expedition leaders with the captain are creating for these unreal and just unbelievable experiences, so that not only are we going through the Antarctic waters, but to really get a snapshot of this beautiful land and the waters and all the living organisms that live in it. It's amazing.
I wouldn't say that each day has been better than the last. I would say that the staff members have made each day so memorable that it's hard to compare each day, because you're in the moment so much that you have completely forgotten about the previous day, regardless of how special it is, because you're just in another special moment in itself. So
in awe, just in awe. And that
they really make sure that each day you see something spectacular and that you are there in the moment to live with what you're seeing.
I always feel like, did they cue it? Cue the icebergs. And even just learning about the icebergs, that the tabular icebergs that are flat on top that look like a plateau, and the different shapes of the icebergs, because as we know, the tip, when the saying, the tip of the iceberg, that, what is it that you learned? The top of the iceberg that you see is so much smaller than the actual size of the full iceberg, because the other 70-80% of the mass of the iceberg actually lives underwater. That just gives you an idea that no matter how big the iceberg is that you're seeing on above water, it's so much more massive below. And because of the technology of they're able to see how close they can get to these icebergs, and we get pretty close to some of these, and because of the passengers and so many of them being expert photographers, they are going out. I mean, it's always bustling with energy and excitement whenever we come across these big icebergs, because of all the photos that are taken, and videos in my case.
Each iceberg has its own story, its own picture. You can always, whichever piece of ice you take a picture of is going to look different than the last, because the lighting's different, the background's different, the ice itself is different. Each picture is unique and special.
So true about the lighting. I've really, just as we do these podcasts, that audio is so important to get good quality audio, and with photos, that these pictures that are taken that do tell a story, that we've experienced some harsh lighting, and then there's ideal lighting that has a way of like really being able to show the lines of the icebergs in certain lighting. And again, because we're in the summer during this cruise, that the sun never sets, so we're always getting some form of daylight, that ideally later in the day we're capturing the best daylight, or the lighting to capture the more intricate details of the icebergs.
Yeah.
What would you say as far as these sunsets? I love sunsets. I have this love affair with the moon, but I have a huge crush on sunsets. And so the fact that any day that we are clear skies and we can see the sunset, it is magical for me because I feel like, oh, then I can have more Prosecco with the sunsets.
Well, there's really no sunsets. It's just different lighting for that time. You could actually argue that it gets brighter at around midnight than it was for the day because the clouds break at different parts of the day. I talked to another guest who stayed up till 3 a.m. because the lighting was just so good and got his pictures at 3 in the morning because that's when the lighting was best that day.
The nice thing about the Lindblad network is that you're able to actually see the front camera. And so one of those days I was capturing the sunset, it was, I thought like, oh, okay, I'll go up on the bridge to get a picture because it can't get better than this. And I come downstairs and here we are watching the front cam and the sun's peeking more through and I'm like, oh, well, I got to go back upstairs. And that's just it. The feeling of this Antarctica trip is that, in essence, when you think that it has just gotten as good as it could get, it only gets better. So with that, we'll end this episode so that we can come back and talk to you more about the next 10 days of our journey through Antarctica together, this voyage, mother-son voyage that we're having. So please, if you enjoyed this episode, like, share, comment, subscribe so you know when the next episode drops. Until then, cheers to you and in a Prosecco. Till next time.